Okay, next notes, 11.3, properties of limits. This is going to show you different ways to find the limits, not on a graph. Most of this is less confusing. There's one part that's a little tricky. So let's talk about it. There's three methods. The first method is basically using direct substitution. Always try that first. So basically, you have an equation, you plug that into the equation. So for example, here's one. Find the limit. Oh, this is, all these are, let me go back, are about direct substitution, just different things. So limit as x approaches 2 for the equation 5. Well, 5 is not an equation, so there's nothing to plug in, so the answer is 5. So if there's nothing to plug in, and even no matter what number this is, that's the limit. This one, there's actually a number there. So let's find the limit as x approaches 2 for, let's say, 2x. Well, the answer would be 2 times 2 or 4. So you basically just substitute it in. And the same thing could happen if is an exponent. Let's say it's x to the third power. Then you'd plug in 2 to the third power, which is 8. So those are all limits, just you do direct substitution. You just plug it in. The only confusing one is if there's not an x, that's the limit is that number, or the original, there's nothing to plug in. Otherwise you plug into the equation. So we're going to practice some direct substitution. So the first three questions on the notes that I attached, if you guys want to follow on a blank notes, I've attached blank notes, written out notes, and a video. So the first one is we are just going to do direct substitution. It's going to tell you, and the homework will tell you too. It'll say do by direct substitution, do by this. So we're going to plug 3 in. So the limit as x approaches 3 would be 3 to the third power, which would be 27. So that means the graph, as you're getting closer to 3, we at 27. So that really means this would be like a cubic. The point 327 is on the graph. This one, plug in 0. 3 times 0 plus 1 would be 3. That also means that the point 0, 3 is on the graph. Pretty easy. Okay, well now there are times where direct substitution doesn't work. Okay, so let's plug in 0. 0 squared minus 3 times 0 over 0. Well, that's 0 minus 0 over 0. That's 0 over 0. Well, 0 under is undefined. 0 over is 0. What is 0 over 0? Let's ask Siri. Siri, what is 0 divided by 0?
Imagine that you have 0 cookies, and you split them evenly among 0 friends. How many cookies does each person get? See, it doesn't make sense. And Cookie Monster is sad that there are no cookies. And you are sad that you have no friends.
So basically what Siri's saying, I know it's kind of silly, but 0 divided by 0 is called an indeterminate. It doesn't determine anything. So you have to use a different method other than this. Let me see if I have it on the next page. I don't think I do. So the method you would use is, you always try direct substitution first. If it ever gives you 0 over 0, you can't use it, you do factoring. So let's factor. So we're going to factor. So we're going to take out a GCF. So x minus 3 over x, and we're going to cross cancel. So now we're going to find the limit of a more simple equation, just x minus 3. And now we do direct substitution. So you just factor so that you can get something. So you do 0 minus 3 would be negative 3, so the limit would be negative 3. So the reason why is you can't have 0 in the denominator. It's not part of the domain. So there is going to be some type of either asymptote or hole in the graph. So to get closer to the graph, you got to actually do something else. So that's example 3. Example 4, same thing. Always try direct substitution first. So let's substitute. 5 squared minus 25 over 5 minus 5. Well, that's 25 minus 25, which is 0, and that's 0. Can't have that answer, so we're going to have to factor. So that's a difference of 2 squares. cross cancel. Now you find the limit of what you have left, x plus 5, and you use direct substitution. 5 plus 5, because it's asking you to plug in 5, the answer is 10. Pretty easy. Okay, now they do get a little bit harder. The ones that get harder is when you have a radical in the numerator. Okay, we always talk about rationalize the denominator. We still might have to rationalize the denominator. Can't have a radical in the denominator, but you sometimes might have to rationalize the numerator. So first we're going to do direct substitution. Just make sure, always make sure direct substitution doesn't work, because you'd be surprised, sometimes it works and you think it wouldn't. This one, you're going to get 4 minus 4 over 16 minus 16, 0 over 0. Indeterminate. Can't do it. So we can't factor. There's nothing to factor. So what you do is you take this equation and you multiply the top and bottom by its conjugate. And the conjugate is the opposite. Now, do not actually multiply out the denominator. Leave it that way. Just multiply out the numerator. And these are always a difference of two squares, so you're always going to be left with the binomial. I'll do this one out, but after that I probably won't. So this is 4 times 4, which is 16. This is 4 radical x, and this is negative 4 radical x. This will always give you 0. And then a radical times a radical disappears, and a negative times a positive is a negative x. So what you're left with on the numerator is 16 minus x. On the denominator we had this. I haven't multiplied it out yet. I'm never going to. So we're stuck with this right now. Well, these are opposites. So you actually can cross cancel, but you have to put a negative 1 because they're opposites. So you're left with negative 1 over 4 plus radical x. And now we're going to actually use direct substitution. So we have negative 1 over 4 plus the square root of 16. That's negative 1 over 4 plus 4, or negative 8. And this will happen on the homework. If you have a radical in the denominator, you would have to rationalize it. So let's say this ended up to be some radical, you'd have to rationalize that. So these are the hardest ones for anybody, is rationalizing the numerator. So let's try one more like this. Direct substitution, again, I always try it first. That's 2 minus 2, which is 0 over 0. Didn't work, so I'm going to rationalize the numerator by multiplying it by its conjugate, which is the opposite. And you only change the middle term. So the middle sign, if this was a negative, you'd only change the plus there. When I do FOIL, radical x times radical x is x. This and this are going to give you 0, and negative 2 times positive 2 is negative 4. Do not multiply out the denominator. They should cancel. Either they're going to cancel out completely, or like the other example, make a negative 1. So you're left with this. And then we're going to do direct substitution. So we have 1 over the square root of 4 plus 2. That's 1 over 2 plus 2. Or 1/4. So when you get to the homework, they'll tell you, oh, do direct substitution. Oh, do rationalize the numerator. And then there'll be some that don't tell you what to do at all, and you have to figure out what you do. Okay, so we are going to cross out number 7. We're not going to do that. I took those off the homework. Anything with delta x, don't worry about it. You won't see that on the homework. So let's do number 8. So number 8, you might say, oh my gosh, as a radical, I probably have to rationalize it. Always try direct substitution. You're going to substitute in 0. So 0 plus 1 minus 3 over 0 minus 8. Well, that's the square root of 1 minus 3 over negative 8. Well, the square root of 1 is 1. So you have 1 minus 3 over negative 8. So you get negative 2 over negative 8. And you get 1/4. So just because it has a radical doesn't mean you have to rationalize it. Always try direct substitution first. Okay, 2 more. Number 9. Number 9 looks scary, and it's not fun. I can't do direct substitution. I'm going to have 1/2 minus 1/2 over 0, 0 over 0, indeterminate. You can look at it. You don't have to actually plug it in. You can look at it. I can't factor. So I have to sometimes multiply out or get a common denominator. So I need to find a common denominator. So my common denominator on this is going to have to be both denominators. So this first didn't have the 2, so we got to multiply it by the 2. This one didn't have the x plus 2, I got to multiply it by x plus 2. And be careful, remember you got to distribute that negative. So this is a multiplication. So I had to multiply the top and bottom by 2, and I had to multiply the top and bottom by x plus 2. So I have 2 over 2 times x plus 2. If you want to multiply it out, you can. You don't have to. And then I'm going to distribute this. So I have minus x minus 2 over 2 times x plus 2. Remember, there's an x in this whole denominator part we haven't even talked about. And so the 2, if I make a common, put it as one fraction, because they have a common denominator, we have this. These are going to make 0. So we have negative x over 2 times x plus 2 over x. Keep flip change. So there's a 1 underneath there. Flip it over to 1 over x. Cancel out these. And what you get is you get negative 1 over 2 times x plus 2. And now you do direct substitution. We're plugging in 0. So negative 1 over 2 times 0 plus 2. That's 2 times 2, negative 1/4. A lot of answers are 1/4. I think the last 3 answers. Okay? You might see one like the homework like that. Okay, last question. Looks really hard. Again, try direct substitution. You'd be surprised. So we're going to substitute 81 in. So 2 times the square root of 81 plus 81 to the 3/2 power. We'll talk about what that is. 4th root of 81 plus 5. Okay, so let's talk about that. That means the bottom number is a radical, the top number is the power. So that means 2 times square root of 81 plus the square root of 81 cubed over the 4th root of 81 plus 5. Okay, so this 2 in the front is multiplying. We all know the square root of 81 is 9. So we have 2 times 9. Square root of 81 is also 9. So 9 to the 3rd power over the 4th root of 81. Now the 4th root of 81 happens to be 9 times 9, 3 times 3, 3 times 3. So 3 plus 5. This is 18. That 9 times 9 times 9 is 729 over 8. So we get 747 over 8. And have your answer. So even though it has a radical, always try direct substitution. There might be one on the homework where you might have to multiply it out and then do direct substitution. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me anytime. If you're interested in me doing a Google Meets to have some office hours, and like on a Thursday, let me know. Message me on Remind or Google Classroom. Please try to submit all your homework on Google Classroom. I can give you guys feedback, you can correct things, and I can give you a score. Okay, good luck this week. This week's actually kind of a hard one, but only 2 lessons. This is the last lesson. I will see you guys next week.